Fabulous. Well, thank you for those kind introductions. One little point of correction, which is relevant to what I'm going to say. I'm not actually part of Extinction Rebellion anymore. I've moved on because I believe it's now time to create something much bigger than Extinction Rebellion, much more encompassing of the contributions that all of us have to give. And that's really part of what I'll be trying to explain in my lecture here this afternoon. Thanks so much for joining me here. I'm not going to be giving any kind of fancy visual presentation. I'm just going to be speaking to you for a while, maybe half an hour or so, and then we'll have plenty of time for an in-depth discussion and Q&A. And yeah, as Mike said, what I want to be talking with you about is how, well, a very simple way to put it is this. If you're not sometimes scared these days, then you're not paying attention. That we have been taught to think that being mentally healthy is always being in some kind of relatively serene state of experiencing positive emotions. But this is false. This is what I call toxic positivity. Positivity is great, right? Experiencing good emotions is great, but it can't be forced. It has to be real. It has to be natural. And sometimes the right thing to do is not to be feeling so great. Sometimes the right thing to do is to be feeling afraid, or to be feeling angry, or to be feeling grief-stricken. And these are the kinds of emotions which should occur to us if we are paying attention to what is happening to our planet and our future. And that's what I'm going to be talking about here with you this afternoon. I say this afternoon because I'm speaking to you from England. And it's great to have this worldwide audience. I'm sure you're at all different points of the day, including some of you in the States in the morning. Welcome all. All right. We are in the age of consequences. We are out of the safe zone. It is a childish illusion to think that anyone or anything is going to successfully and safely fix the ecological crisis. It's not something that can be fixed. It's not the kind of thing that you fix. It's not any kind of problem. It's so much more bigger and more wicked than that. It's what people call a predicament. It has tragic dimensions. It has existential dimensions. It's not going to be solved. It's not going to be fixed. They call it an emergency. They say it's a climate and ecological emergency. But even that understates it. What do I mean? Well, an emergency is the kind of thing that you can imagine coming to an end. An emergency is the kind of thing that you might be able to run away from, or at the least that you might be able to find some way of dealing with such that it no longer afflicts you. None of these things apply to the situation that we're in. The climate and ecological more than emergency is going to define all of our lives more and more for the whole of the rest of our lives. It's going to go on getting worse for a very long time to come, and some of us are going to end up being killed by it. That is the truth. People know this. More and more of us sense it. And these are difficult truths. These are truths which it's appropriate to feel fear, pain, anxiety, grief, heartbreak, anger, and other difficult emotions in response to them. My experience is that mostly people are not just curling up into a ball when they actually dare to encounter these truths. Partly because more and more of us now sense that more and more of us now sense this. Do you get me? There are two stages to transformational change. There's a stage when everyone realizes we can't go on like this. And then there's the stage when everyone realizes that everyone already realizes this, that everyone else realizes this. We are not quite at that second stage, but we are coming to it. So if you're sometimes really feeling this, you're not alone. You're not mad. If you're feeling this already, and my bet is that you are, you probably wouldn't have turned up to hear this talk, then you are very sane. You are a vanguard of mental health. And that's what the title of my talk this afternoon means. Mental health now means sometimes feeling fearful, even depressed or desperate. These feelings, when evoked by the crisis that we've entered into, are not pathological. On the contrary, they are spurs to act. That's why we feel these things. They're spurs to get involved in changing something. So rather than people giving up, serious climate concern and climate action is at last starting to hit the mainstream, not just the radical fringe, the mainstream, as we wake up en masse, not only to our predicament, but to others waking up to it too. Fed up of business as usual, and with our reasonable demands having been thus far largely unmet, people are taking matters into their own hands. So this is why I've launched something as a kind of successor to Extinction Rebellion. It's called the Climate Majority Project. You can find it easily at www.moderateflank.org. We'll be launching formally as the Climate Majority Project later on this month, worldwide. We're seeking to prove concept first in the UK, in England, but it's going to be worldwide, and we've got contacts already in America and other places. The idea of this emerging project is to be a rallying point for people, ordinary people, not a small radical flank, not just activists, who understand the depth of the crisis that we're now in and want to do something meaningful about it. And the Climate Majority Project is starting to bring together those who, in religions and civic associations, in neighborhoods and communities, in workplaces and professions, are through with outsourcing this, through with asking others to fix it, and are instead determined to do our best to mitigate it and to adapt to it. You get what I mean by outsourcing. There's this great temptation in relation to this crisis to think, well, this is for somebody else. This is for technologists or the government or the activists. But as long as we continue to outsource it, it's just going to carry on getting worse. We have to face it together. We have to face it ourselves. We have to cope with it, and we can flourish through it, in spite of it, and indeed because of it. And that's partly what I'm going to be explaining in the remainder of this talk. This terrible situation that we're in can, in a very real way, be the making of us. Why? Well, in a nutshell, because it gives us meaning. Right here, a life's purpose is waiting for anyone and everyone who needs one. And, well, my view is that there's nothing that our society, which is so full of anomie and nihilism, needs more than purpose. Our society so desperately needs purpose. This, by the way, is also what great psychologists and philosophers have taught us. Somebody like Viktor Frankl, some of you may know, the author of the remarkable book, Man's Search for Meaning, which he wrote in the wake of his experience of having survived the Second World War concentration camps, where he found an extraordinary truth, that there's something that's even more important to human beings than food and water and shelter, namely meaning. That people could survive for extraordinarily long periods with absolutely nothing, with just their naked, emaciated bodies, if they still had something to live for. Whereas other people who had bits of food, bits of water, bits of shelter, would just die if they didn't have anything to live for. Similarly, Friedrich Nietzsche, the great German philosopher of the 19th century, argued that without meaning, human beings are literally nothing. So the wonderful truth about the climate and ecological crisis is contained in the horrible truth about it. The horrible truth is that we're in the age of consequences. We're out of the safety zone. It's going to go on getting worse for a very long time to come, even if we get our act together. But that contains within it the wonderful truth that I'm starting to enunciate here, that the difficult emotions we're experiencing make sense, that this whole experience can give us meaning, bring us together, give us purpose and society and community in a way that we've been sorely lacking these things for a long time now. Consider another philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau has this mysterious pronouncement: the remedy is in the evil. What does he mean? What can that possibly mean? The remedy is in the evil, something good coming out of something bad. Well, it means just the kind of thing I've just said. That in this awful crisis lies exactly what we need, something to actually bring us together. Or consider the German poet Hölderlin, who famously said, "Where the danger lies, there too lies the saving power." Exactly where the danger lies, that's where the saving power is. In facing up to the crisis, In the painful realizations and emotions it evokes lies our possible salvation. Where the danger lies, there lies the saving power. And here's the greatest reason why. When we allow ourselves to actually feel our pain, our fear, our grief, our anger, then we, many millions of us, are ready to act with determination to ensure that what is coming does not take us all down with it. Our grief, our pain for the earth, our fear and love for one another, our terror or horror for what may lie in store for our children or grandchildren, these are brought home to us by this crisis. They emerge, they live, they transform. I call this stubborn realism. To cite another great philosopher, the political philosopher Gramsci. Gramsci said, what we need is pessimism of the intellect, but optimism of the will. We're prepared to look at how bad things are straight in the face, but we remain optimistic in terms of what we try to do. So to vary Gramsci slightly, I would say what we need now is optimism of the will combined with realism of the intellect. Because that's what we're talking about here, realism about the climate, which begins with going beyond climate change denial, but has to go far beyond that to really engage with the reality of where we are as a species at this moment in history. Optimism of the will, realism of the intellect. From these, we can get an enormously hopeful trajectory. But before you get ready to end this talk on a high, and to make sure that there's no excuse in my words for any complacency or false reassurance, I want to dive with you now even deeper. Because it's really important not to think, all right, so the climate crisis has something wonderful to deliver to us within this terrible burden that it imposes on us. Great. Because it's not enough to just focus on the climate crisis. For starters, it's clear that it's not enough to fixate just on slashing carbon emissions. It's way too late for that. We have to adapt to the terrible climate damage that is here and the worst climate damage that is coming. And we probably ain't seen nothing yet. The last few years, believe it or not, world temperatures have probably been suppressed by the global La Niña weather system. That's about to change. We may be moving into an El Nino weather system, which could throw us forward several more tenths of a degree globally. And, well, later this summer and next year, you're probably going to see what that means. So it's not enough to just focus on what they call mitigation or prevention of the worsening of the climate more than emergency. We have to adapt. We have to build resilience. We have to prepare for disasters that are here and that are coming. Furthermore, as we're increasingly realizing, the flip side of the climate crisis is the biodiversity crisis. The two are intimately connected. You can't think seriously, for example, about the Amazon or other rainforests without thinking of them as places that are alive. Much of the carbon that is sequestered around the world is sequestered by living systems. And even if we manage to actually get a handle on that climate crisis, and we didn't tackle the biodiversity crisis, we'd still be in appalling trouble. Imagine a future in which everything is brilliantly renewably powered, but we're still making other creatures extinct at the appalling rate we are at the moment, roughly one every 10 minutes. Think about that for a second. Since I started talking here this afternoon, 1 or 2 species have gone extinct. The average background extinction rate for reference is about 1 a day. So imagine a future in which everything's renewably powered. So you've got renewably powered, solar powered tractors. You've got solar powered vehicles that bring down trees and forests. We could have a solar powered fleet of vehicles that eliminated the Amazon altogether. And we would be moving into an incredibly dangerous future. So we have to think about adaptation, and we have to think about biodiversity, about life. But even that isn't enough. The ecological crisis is part of something even bigger. Put it this way, climate is the thick end of a very large wedge, which we can call the polycrisis. The polycrisis is the crisis of our entire system, poly, many. So, for example, the AI trajectory we're now on is part of the polycrisis. we're suddenly waking up, many of us, to how dangerous the current situation is with artificial intelligence. My own view, based on my philosophical work, is that the ideas that we're going to have some kind of Terminator-style future are much exaggerated. Robotization is not moving as fast as sci-fi sometimes predicted. And in particular, we don't really have yet anything even remotely like genuinely intelligent artificial intelligence. But that shouldn't be a very great cause for joy or let alone complacency. The artificial intelligence that is growing is extremely dangerous, make no mistake about it. It's going to smash many human jobs. It's going to smash many human systems. What we saw with Facebook in relation to the birth of Brexit and of Donald Trump, for example, that's just the beginning. AI is going to do much bigger and more dangerous things than that. Nuclear weapons are still there, and they are ready to annihilate us at a moment's notice. That's part of the Polycrisis. And of course, something we realized a lot more than we did a few years ago, is that pandemics are here and they are going to escalate. They are part of the Polycrisis too. The Polycrisis means that we are affected simultaneously now by numerous endemic crises. We need to think about how these things are all joined up. What is at the cause of them all? I'm not going to go into that into great detail, but I'm sure you've got some ideas about it yourselves. It's got something to do with capitalism. It's got something to do with human competitive drives and systems that enhance those drives. And I'm going to go into those points in a little more detail in a little while. As a way into that, I want to explain how the way we should see the climate crisis as part of the Polycrisis is a way that can enable us to get a better sense or understanding of how we need to protect ourselves against what is coming. So, as I said, we might see climate as the thick end of a very large wedge, the Polycrisis. When you see that wedge properly, you see that system change is needed, or rather, that system change is coming. The future is going to be very different from the present. Anyone who imagines anything, any kind of version of business as usual or reformed business as usual is deluding themselves. For example, the future is definitely going to be more local. It will either be more local because we choose for it to be more local, or it'll be more local because we choose to try to perpetuate the current system. And then the system will be viciously changed for us by nature, by an enraged nature, if you will. And as that system collapses, well, then what emerges on the other side of it will be a lot more local. A future in a collapsed society is a more local future. So we are facing a more local future. The question is it a more intelligent, wisely chosen local future, or one that gets imposed upon us by our own stupidity? System change is coming. Attempts to perpetuate the current system only perpetuate its instabilities and make more certain that it ends with extreme prejudice. But climate remains the white swan here. What do I mean by that? Well, you're aware perhaps of the concept of a black swan put forward by my friend and colleague Nassim Taleb. The idea of a black swan is something unexpected which comes along and disastrously upsets all our expectations. So there's a sense in which what is potentially coming to us through unknown future pandemics or the unknown effects of artificial intelligence, if it carries on growing as it's currently growing, there's a sense in which these are black swans. We don't know what they're going to look like, and we don't know if they're going to take us down. We might luck out. We might luck out with pandemics. So we've just reached a point where COVID is no longer a global emergency. COVID has killed about 15 to 20 million people. That's terrible. But compared to what we initially thought, where it was thought it could kill hundreds of millions of people, we've managed to get through it relatively lightly. I use those terms relatively, very advisedly here, obviously. We could luck out vis-a-vis pandemics. It could be that COVID is the high watermark for a long time to come. Similarly with artificial intelligence, through good judgment and luck, we could get through this. We could have a future in which we've managed to rein in some of the worst successes of AI, and it never gets totally out of control. But there is no chance that we're going to luck out on climate. The only way we get through the climate more than emergency is if we turn to face it and deal with it as we've never dealt with anything before. Because on anything even remotely like a business as usual trajectory, the climate more than emergency is going to take us down. It is going to destroy this civilization. We could luck out on pandemics or AI or nukes, not on climate. We're going to need a lot more than luck to get through on climate. So that's why I say the climate more than emergency is a white swan. It is coming to take us down as a default assumption. We don't know for sure that's the case with pandemics and AI, nuclear weapons. We do know pretty much for sure now that it is the case with climate. The only way we get to avert the climate more than emergency is by turning to face it collectively and getting really serious about it. So don't be distracted. We need to look deep into the climate crisis. We need to concentrate on what we can see there, which interconnects with all the other crises. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, there is unfortunate, to put it mildly, emerging evidence that the deterioration of our climate system massively probabilifies the increasing wave of pandemics we're likely to see this century. With artificial intelligence, there is a risk that the growth of it feeds the climate crisis because, for example, of the enormous amount of energy it takes to train the large language models that they use in AI. And climate degradation may destabilize our world geopolitical system to make nuclear war more likely. All these crises interconnect. It's one joined up thing, the Polycrisis. We need to look deep into the climate crisis, which interconnects with all the other crises. When we do this, when we really look deep into the climate crisis, what we're actually doing is looking deeper into ourselves. As one might say, the microcosm is the macrocosm. We need to concentrate on what we can find there, deep in ourselves, deep in our souls, deep in our failing civilization, because this cataclysm that we've created is something that we've created by omission and commission, deliberately and accidentally. It hasn't come about by accident. It hasn't come about by pure bad luck. We need to look deep into our profound interrelatedness with each other and with all life on this precious planet. We need to understand much better than we've been taught by our current civilization how profoundly we depend upon nature. And when we do all this, in what we want to avert from, in what we want to not look at, in when we don't want to look at the difficulty of reality, and when we don't want to face and feel the difficult emotions that come up, there is the gift. The very difficult emotions that arise when we look deep into the climate crisis and see the polycrisis and what we might call the meta-crisis, the crisis which is at the root of all of these things, the crisis that is to do with the fundamental drivers of the rest of the more than emergency. When we do this, when we see deep into ourselves, when we allow ourselves to feel these so-called negative emotions, anxiety, heartbreak, even despair, well, then we start to actually get somewhere. These emotions could be, I believe they will be, the making of us. The heartbreak that we feel when we look at a desolated rainforest, the despair that we feel when we contemplate the future sometimes, these are exactly what we need. These are rational. They all arise from love. They all arise from care. Why are we anxious about the future? Because we're anxious that what we care about, those that we love, that we love, is being destroyed. Why do we feel ecological grief? Because we love nature, because we love the beauty of this planet. It's hard to see it when it gets damaged. Why do we feel despair? Because it's so awful to have to contemplate these kinds of things. All of these emotions, all of these difficult emotions that we want to push away, they all arise from love. They are forms of love. The difficult emotions are rational. They are a huge and growing reservoir of energy. If you spend all your time trying to keep them at arm's bay, if you listen to people who say to you, oh, don't engage with fear. That's not spiritual. Or people who say you mustn't despair. What are people who say you mustn't despair actually doing? They're trying to keep despair at arm's length. They're desperately trying to keep it at arm's length. Do you understand me? They are in despair. If you are desperately trying to keep despair at arm's length all the time, you are in despair. This is what the great theological philosopher Swan, the Danish philosopher of the 19th century, taught. Those who are in the worst despair are precisely those who deny that they're in despair and do say that despair is the worst thing. If rather than using all this energy to keep despair at arm's length, we embrace the despair, we turn and face ourselves and each other, then that energy starts to become available. The difficult emotions are a huge and growing reservoir of energy. My claim is that fully embraced, they are all we need. Fully embraced, loved rather than rejected, treated as energy, they are all we need. So, the love that we are, whether it takes the form of effort, of sacrifice, of giving, of joyfulness, of grief-strickenness, worry, desperation, presence, the love that we have for our children, for our nieces and nephews, the love that we have for life itself. This love is an indescribable gift and a truly mighty power. I want to urge you, let yourself fall into it, which means into and through all of us and each of us. There'll be tears on this journey. There'll be dark nights of the soul. There will be impossible heartbreak and great joy. And whether or not we survive, because you cannot attach to results here, you cannot be certain that we will get through this or that you will get through this. Whether or not we survive, the truth that I've been seeking to outline here this afternoon is in the end greater than the horrible truth out of which it arises. The horrible truth of the climate and ecological more than emergency, the terrifying truth of the polycrisis contains within it the seeds of true mental health, which consists in being willing and able to face all that is, including our own difficult feelings. And that is why I say that true sanity now is being willing to experience those feelings. And to come back to the very simple point with which I started, if you're not sometimes afraid now, if you're not sometimes grief-stricken, if you're not sometimes angry, then you're not paying attention. And if you're paying attention, you will feel those things, and that's good. Don't let anyone tell you that they're pathological. They are rational, they are sane. Thank you for feeling them. Thanks for listening. Let's have a discussion about this.
Thank you very much, Rupert. That was very powerful. So the next section that we're going to do is a Q&A. I'll be asking questions as well as we'll open it up to the audience if the audience has questions. And just for the audience, the way that we're doing the questions, we will not be taking questions directly from chat. If you have a question, please raise your hand in Zoom. To do so, on the bottom right-hand side, second from the left, you will see a button that says reactions. You're going to click on that and you're going to click raise hand. And then I will call on you in the order in which people raise their hands. What I ask is that I'll unmute you. You will state your name. You will state where you're from, and then you'll ask your question. We ask that everyone keep their questions brief and on topic. We will then mute you in order to give everyone a chance and to keep this moving. We won't be taking follow-up questions. If you do have another question, you can get online again, and if we have time, you can ask that question. So with that, I want to ask you a question. So you started off the talking about how you have moved beyond Extinction Rebellion and you started the Climate Majority Project. What strategic differences, what tactical differences do you have with them? And why did you decide that you needed to move beyond Extinction Rebellion in order to achieve what you thought was necessary?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So look, the way I want to start by answering that is to say what I've been talking about here this afternoon, these kinds of difficult emotions, which sometimes get pathologized by psychologists, by our broader society. these are far too good to be left to a small fringe radical coterie of activists, right? These emotions and the difficult journey that one needs to go with them, these are affecting now more and more people, and that's right, and that's going to continue. That's an inevitable process. Now, do I think that most of those people who get affected by these things are then going to start, lying down in the streets in front of government departments or vehicles or whatever? No, I don't think that's true at all. But what I do think is that people absolutely need to face the truth, and that's the right thing to do. Absolutely need to process and handle these emotions and do so together and in a serious way. And that when we do so, we want to take action, millions of us, and then it'll be tens of millions, and then it'll be hundreds of millions. So what I'm really saying is we need to find a way to enable those millions of people, and ultimately, I believe that will be a majority of us, literally a majority, to take action which they feel comfortable taking and which is commensurate with the feelings that they are feeling. So I'm not saying that I've discovered something which is kind of better than or that contradicts what Extinction Rebellion or the people at Standing Rock or other, wonderful upstanding radicals have brought or offered. And I'm very proud of the time I spent in Extinction Rebellion in 2019 in helping to launch Extinction Rebellion in the UK. What I'm saying is what we did then, what was done then, was not for everybody. It raised the profile of the issue. It brought real attention to it. Now what we need to do is find on-ramps for millions of people to engage with this and to take action. And that kind of action, I believe, will be action in all the places where people actually have potential voice and power with others, in parts of our lives where we are not stuck into individual silos. So it's not going to be just about consumer action. It's not going to be just about who you vote for. It's going to be about building resilience in communities. It's going to be about changing our workplaces, changing our businesses, changing professions. I think there is enormous scope, for example, for academics, teachers, lawyers, insurers, auditors, financiers to have influence through their jobs on what kind of future we have. It's going to be through people's churches, through our spiritual lives, because what I've been talking about here this afternoon, these are psychological truths, but they're also spiritual truths, right? It's a psycho-spiritual journey or approach. And that's what the Climate Majority Project is trying to offer, a kind of framework for thinking about how all of this makes sense and kind of hangs together and all points in broadly the same direction. I believe that in the years to come, besides an upsurge in activism, there will be far more people building resilience in their communities. There will be far more people taking action in their jobs to seek to have a livable planet come down for their children and grandchildren. And that would be the emergence of a climate majority.
And how do you see resiliency in the local communities? Is it better building structures? I mean, basically, you're talking about impact, right? We're going to have these effects. There's really not that much that we can do about it. What does that resiliency look like in your mind, to the extent that you have a vision of it?
Yeah. So the crucial thing about resilience, right, is that it has two aspects. There is physical resilience and there is psychological resilience. Now, it is crucial we have both. I've been talking this afternoon mainly about psychological resilience or psychospiritual resilience and how we build that not by running away from, but by facing the difficult emotions that are arising. And I believe that as people process those emotions, that makes it easier for them to engage in physical resilience building, in, for example, co-creating local food growing together and local water harvesting and all the ways of building community that there are, which include obviously things like building community structures and so forth. That's just one aspect of it. And obviously these two kinds, I've said there's two kinds, really they naturally overlap or interlink. But it's worth kind of thinking, am I sort of working at the moment more on the physical side or more on the psychological side of resilience building? Now, here's the really exciting thing about resilience building of any kind. as I said briefly in my talk, it wakes people up. When people see other people engaging in handling difficult truths, when they see other people engaging in trying to grow food together in their local communities because they're concerned about whether they're going to be able to trust long supply lines and so forth in future, then they start to realize, oh my God, it's real. And it's not far away. It's not for 2050. It's not for my grandchildren. It's coming. These people are doing the sensible thing. Maybe I should do the same. So in that sense, resilience building actually contributes also to tackling the causes of the problem, because when people are waking up and when they wake other people up, then they turn their attention also to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, to tackling our crazy intensive farming, livestock farming, food system, and so on and so forth, to tackling all the main causes of climate degradation in the first place. So the intriguing, wonderful fact is that by focusing on building resilience against what is here, which is an attitude which it's easy for frankly everybody to take up when they start to engage with reality at all. Even those people who are very skeptical about whether anything can be done about tackling the causes of the problem, we do then contribute to tackling the causes of the problem, because it encourages a wider sort of rippling effect of waking up. And that encourages people to vote differently and to organize differently and to start to shame other actors, including ultimately governments, into taking the crisis more seriously.
So what you're saying is, so it's just so I understand what you're saying, it sounds like you're talking more about a bottom-up approach where the institutions have basically failed us and we need to become more resilient on our own end. Is that a correct understanding?
That is absolutely right. What I'm saying is it is clear, and we have to admit that our so-called leaders have chronically failed us. We need an approach now which is primarily bottom-up. However, the beauty of it is that when we engage seriously in this bottom-up process, we will start to co-create a situation in which it will become possible for us to affect and change our leaders and change our systems. So actually, the best shot we have at creating, in the longer run, good top-down contributions to change is to do the bottom-up stuff really well at this point.
My next question that I have is, you spoke about the age of consequences. So
yes.
What are the expected consequences? What is the time frame that you see it at? You know, I've heard 2028 is the last day. You know, it seems like an arbitrary number, but 2028 is like the last year that we have to kind of turn our greenhouse gas emissions down, unless, before we have catastrophic effects. You're saying that we're going to have catastrophic effects. We're basically already going down that way, and we're beyond looking for for these little tweaks and changes. We need to really brace for the impact. What is the meaningful way that you believe that we are going to see these negative impacts? And what kind of time frame do you see? I mean, I know we're seeing parts of it already, but what do you see coming down the pike?
Yeah. Well, so I said a little bit in my talk about what's coming probably over the next year or two. So check out what's happening with ocean surface temperatures. Very, very worrying. They're spiking. They're literally going off the charts. That may be partly due to what's going on, but can only be partly due to what's going on with these ocean currents in the Pacific, which have caused the La Nina system for the last couple of years. We now may be moving, it's not certain, but it looks kind of likely that we're moving into a so-called El Nino system, which means higher global temperatures worldwide. So a further spike in temperatures. So that is, that will definitely mean that a lot of records tumble, maximum temperature records over the next few years, which obviously is very dangerous in itself. It will also very likely mean unprecedented droughts, heat waves, may well also mean unprecedented storms. This is what's probably coming in the next few years, and we need to brace for that. And that's not long off now. Like I say, it could start literally later this summer, i.e., within a few months. Now, beyond that, anyone who gives you kind of exact dates is someone you ought to be skeptical of. If you hear somebody saying something like, such and such terrible is going to happen in 2028, or we must do so and so before 2029, they're being unreasonably exact, and that's a cause for suspicion. The truth is, those kinds of exactitudes are not what we can anticipate. Instead, it's more about kind of broader trends and preparing ourselves to deal with those. But as you said, Mike, one aspect of this which is really critically important is to get out of the habit of thinking we've got 5 years left, or we've got 7 years left, or something to turn this around. What I mean when I say that we're in the age of consequences, and this is a phrase that comes, by the way, from the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. That's the relevance of it. Yeah, so Churchill used this phrase to explain to people and to berate people, if you will, who were saying, oh, well, we can start to rearm and protect ourselves against Hitler. We've got to get on with it now. We've got such and such amount of time left before Hitler potentially strikes at us. Churchill's response was, no, we're in the age of consequences. We've left it too late. We've left it so late that there are going to be bad consequences now. And indeed there were, right, from 1939 to the early mid-1940s, very, very bad consequences. But of course, what's useful about that analogy is that, of course, what Churchill didn't do is say, we're in the age of consequences, therefore we should give up. Right? We're in the age of consequences, therefore we should redouble our efforts to take seriously preparation, and ultimately, as well, challenging the root causes of how we got into this kind of mess. So if anyone ever says it's too late, or if anyone ever says to you, it's not too late, either of those statements is always a drastic oversimplification. The truth is, it's too late for some things, and not too late for other things. It's much more mundane, right? So it's too late to have a smooth, serene transition now. That might have been possible if we'd have acted in an intelligent way in the 1980s or even the 1990s and read the science and listened to James Hansen from NASA and others. But we didn't, and we have prepared quite poorly over the last couple of generations, to put it mildly. It's not we've done nothing, but most of what we've done has been either no good or indeed in the wrong direction. So there are some things it's too late for, and there are other things it's not too late for. It's not too late to find effective ways of bracing for impact. It's not too late. It's never too late to do the right thing. It's not too late to drastically rein in the power of the fossil fuel industry over the next generation, but it is too late to prevent the very serious and escalating harms that are going to emerge over the next 10 to 20 years, and which are going to, as I say, define the lives of most of us. And therefore, it's way too late to think that there can be such a thing as avoiding this, let alone solving it. So that's why we in the Climate Majority Project say the right metaphor to use here is not it's 5 minutes to midnight. It's not, it's really urgent. It's not, we've got 5 years left to sort everything out or else. The right metaphor to use is to say it's 5 past midnight. We are into the danger zone. We are in the age of consequences. We've left it much later than we should have done. It's too late to avoid all sorts of harms. But turn that around again, it's only 5 past midnight. You know, it's not like 2 o'clock in the morning in the very darkest, deepest hour. There's still plenty of time to sort a lot of things and ameliorate a lot of things, which there will not be time for if we leave it another 10 or 15 years. And yeah, this all starts with what we can do and what we can do together. Don't try to face this alone. That's impossible. What we can do together, what we can do as people living in a community together, what we can do as citizens together, what we can do as people who perhaps work together or pray together. That's where it starts.
Okay, so the title of your talk today is about, it's the same thing to feel anxious. Once we give into that despair and are appropriately motivated by that despair, hopefully that will be the reaction. What are the actions and tactics that we can do? What are the, you're talking about a bottom up kind of movement. What are the things that ordinary people can start doing today that will have, at least the aggregate consequences of those actions will have a meaningful impact to either ameliorate the impact of this ongoing climate crisis, or minimize the future impact?
Yeah. Good. Okay, so that's obviously a huge question. We started talking about some of the answer to it. For more detail, people might want to go and look at what's at moderateflank.org or climatemajorityproject.com. But to elaborate a little on what we've already said so far, I want to do two things. Firstly, I want to give a little bit more by way of examples, and then secondly, I want to kind of turn the question around in a way, or open the question up to the audience. I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. So firstly, some more examples. We've talked a bit about how we can act together to build resilience. It's what we call community climate action. It is absolutely critical. There will be far more of it in the coming years. It's already started. Some people on this call are probably already involved with it, as in my small way I am. Where I live, I've got a third of an acre on which I'm growing a fair bit of food, collecting huge amounts of rainwater, trying to work with other people in my village to do some preparedness, giving talks about it, organizing with other people about it. Let's talk a little bit about what can be done through workplaces and professions. So let me give you a really interesting example. There is a lot that is happening in the field of the law in this regard. You may have heard of some of it. You may have heard of climate litigation, for example. This is a big and coming trend. A lot of lawyers now are involved with trying to sue companies, governments, other actors who have got us into this trouble, and are using the law as an instrument to help and protect ecosystems, young people, the future. That is very encouraging. Something else which is happening a bit more below the radar, but which is also part of this moderate flank, also part of this emerging climate majority, is stuff that's going on in corporations vis-a-vis the law. So there is an organization which is growing and which is part of our climate majority project called Lawyers for Net Zero. And what Lawyers for Net Zero is corporate lawyers who are seeking to hold their own firms, if you will, to account, to get their own corporations to act according to the law and to stay ahead of the law. They're asking questions like, for example, what kind of things could we get sued for? Could we get litigated for in the next 5 to 10 years in relation to climate, in relation to ecology and nature? How are we to be protecting ourselves with regard to those things? And what are our already extant legal obligations vis-a-vis the climate and nature? And how must we really make sure that we get serious about those? I think this is a hugely encouraging development. And I think we're going to see more and more of this. I think organizations like Lawyers for Net Zero will flourish, and that this will be an example of what can happen across a whole swathe of professions and workplaces and businesses, of people in their jobs, not just in their consumer behavior or their voting behavior, but in their jobs, moving to take seriously this vast threat and moving to do something, if you will, to assuage their own guilt, to assuage their own anxiety, to assuage these difficult negative emotions that we discussed earlier. So that's by way of giving you another sort of worked example of what this looks like. Now turning to the second part of what I promised, because I don't actually want to sit here and kind of say what people need to be doing is X, Y, Z. Here are the exact things you need to be doing. Part of this is kind of more invitational. Part of this is about asking each and every one of us to figure out, what is my role here? What ought I to be doing? What can I be doing to most strongly respond to the situation and to really rise to the challenge and to really find a way, among other things, of effectively dealing with these difficult negative emotions, which otherwise will potentially sometimes take me over? Because believe you me, if anyone hasn't tried it yet, undertaking these kinds of actions is about the best way that there is in the final analysis of not feeling bad, not feeling disempowered, not feeling desperate in relation to the situation. So what I want to say to people on this second front is, it's not a question of kind of being told what to do. Again, it's not about outsourcing it to others, including me. It's about you figuring out by yourself and with others. The others could be your friends and loved ones. They could be a mentor. They could be a therapist. They could be somebody on this call here today. If you haven't already figured out, if you don't already know what your life's purpose is, what it is. For some people, it will be working in their neighborhood, in their geographic community, engaging in community climate action or something like that. For other people, it might be trying to transform their church into an eco-church. For many people, I think it will be doing the kind of thing that we started to describe in their workplace, in their profession, in the business that they own, in the institution where they are employed. And for each and every one of us, we have to look into this and decide it for ourselves. You know, I've been very fortunate to find my life's purpose in the last few years. I was for many years an academic, having a wonderful time studying and teaching philosophy, as you said in your intro to this talk here this afternoon, and that was great. But my life has really transformed since I got seriously involved in doing the kind of thing that I do now, the Climate Majority Project, giving talks like this, etc., over the past 5 years, really, since around the time when we were dreaming up Extinction Rebellion. And if you haven't gone through this process yourselves, then now is the time. Don't leave it too much longer, because time is short. But also, crucially, as I say, don't think of this process as an individual process. Yes, it's for you to decide what your unique contribution is and how you can make the most difference. And that will, in the long run, conduce most to your psychological health. But it will only be so if the process is one that you, in some really meaningful sense, engage in with others. And the only ways we get to adequately confront this more than emergency are with others. And that's good, because that's the kind of beings that human beings are. We're not meant to face these kinds of things alone.
So during your talk, thank you for that. During your talk, you spoke about the Polycrisis, how there's an intersection between these various things. One of the things you mentioned was nuclear weapons. What are your thoughts with regard to the environment with nuclear power? Is that, obviously there's dangers to that. We saw, I think it was Fukushima in Japan, meltdown. But it also is an alternative to, you know, carbon emission fossil fuels. So where do you see the role of nuclear power in the climate crisis? Yes.
So you're asking the question because obviously it's a much vexed and much discussed question, and it's an important question. If anyone wants to know my detailed answer, you can Google what I've written about it and said about it in other talks in the past. But let me say something succinct about it here. And the sort of USP I think I've got to offer on this is as follows. There's various kinds of good reasons for being pro or anti-nuclear in relation to the situation that we're in. On the pro-nuclear side, as you say, at the point of energy production, nuclear power is more or less zero carbon, although that shouldn't be used to encourage the illusion that nuclear power as a whole is zero carbon. There are enormous carbon emissions associated with the mining of uranium, transportation, construction of nuclear power plants, the endless guarding of nuclear waste, etc. On the negative side, you've got, for example, the fact that nuclear power takes quite a long time to bring on stream compared to renewable energies, which can be incredibly quick now to bring on stream. But the USP I want to offer is this. So I've offered a vision in my talk here this afternoon of the difficult future in which we are entering into, and of how we cannot be assured any longer that our civilization is going to continue, or indeed that any civilization is going to continue. We are on track to collapse our civilization. We only get to change that track, to take ourselves off the kind of white swan path towards climate breakdown, if we do extraordinary things over the next generation or so. Now, the question we need to be asking ourselves is this: is it a safe bet to go for nuclear power in relation to a future where we cannot safely predict that we will be able to have a kind of high-tech civilization which will be able to adequately guard that nuclear waste, adequately monitor those nuclear power plants, to prevent terrorists or other agents from seizing spent nuclear fuel or creating dirty bombs or whatever it might be. And you can see where I'm going with this. My view is that nuclear power is a technology that could make sense in a situation where one was very confident of the continuation of something like business as usual. And so where one was confident of there being a future in which we were able to protect those nuclear power plants and protect ourselves from the potential bad effects, protect ourselves from future Fukushimas or things which could be 100 times worse than Fukushima or Chernobyl. And my judgment, tragically, is that we absolutely cannot assure ourselves now that that is going to be our future. Now, some people say, well, yes, we should bet on nuclear power because it makes it a bit more likely that we're going to have a future where we don't collapse. But I'm sorry, that just isn't an acceptable, strong argument as I see it. We need to be confident that we can stop nuclear waste, nuclear fissile materials, etc., falling into the wrong hands. We need to be confident that we can stop nuclear waste from causing irreparable, very long-term environmental damage. We cannot be confident of these kinds of things in a future where collapse is a very real option. So my professional judgment, if you will, is that nuclear power is at this point a really bad bet, a really unsafe bet. It would be a bet, it would be reckless. We ought to be looking for ways of going forward which are much safer. Basically what we ought to be doing, Mike, as I see it, is a drastic increase in the genuinely renewable energies, such as wind and solar, and a drastic reduction in energy use and in energy waste. Now, that's a difficult message for most current countries to receive, and for many current citizens to receive. But it seems to me it's about our best bet. If we want to be even at all confident of being able to hand down a flourishing, survivable future to our children and our grandchildren, that's the kind of thing we'll be trying to do, to reduce energy demand, to reduce energy waste, to increase energy efficiency, and of course, to drastically increase the amount of genuinely renewable energies that are on offer. And I think we should be phasing nuclear power down, not increasing it.
So this whole, most of the presenters talk about plant-based diets, which are, there's a lot of research that suggests it's overwhelmingly good for, better for you than what people are eating. People are scared of dying in general, and specifically from cancer, stroke, heart disease. They're scared of dementia, and yet they don't want to take the changes, make hard changes in their own life to directly impact their own life. What do you think? Or what have you seen? Are there any glimmers of hope with regard to people being willing to give up their energy intensive lifestyle in order to save something abstract like the planet, which then will have an impact on them?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. And I'm sure we can all resonate with it. Real change is hard, right? It took me a fair while to move to a mainly plant-based diet back in my 20s. That's an experience which many people have had. Not many people sort of do it literally overnight, and that's not even the hardest example of the kind of change that we are talking about. So you could ask the question this way: am I optimistic? So that takes me back to my talk, right? And what I said in my talk is, well, intellectually, no, I'm not terribly optimistic. It looks like the odds are stacked against us. But then again, in a way, that's not really the right question, right? Because the right question is, where do we sit in relation to this attitudinally and existentially? And do we think and feel that it's possible for something extraordinary to happen? And there, it seems to me that we do at least have some reasons for an optimism of the will, an optimism of the spirit. So let's start with Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future, Greta Thunberg, the school climate strikes, and so forth. There was an extraordinary, unpredicted upsurge in activity among activists and radicals in 2019. And in one way or another, across much of the world, it did change the world. It had its roots in the telling of the truth. It often expressed through blunt emotional authenticity. It went way beyond what the environmental movement up to that point had mainly been offering. And that's partly because it achieved quite a lot of resonance. In other words, a lot of people who didn't get involved with any of those school strikes or whatever felt what those people were talking about, what we were trying to evoke back in 2019. So that's one reason. I could give others, but that's one reason, which is kind of directly salient to what we're talking about, for being, if you will, optimistic that serious change is possible. Now, of course, one can respond to that by saying, well, yeah, but we didn't get much serious change at the level of government policy. We didn't even get a majority of the population actually on side and making serious changes themselves. And that, of course, is where the Climate Majority Project comes in. We're trying to do something unbelievably ambitious. We're trying to move from something which is a minority concern to make it a majority concern. But remember that we're also kind of moving with the times, with the zeitgeist, right? We think it is certain that there will be more action of the kind that we're talking about in workplaces and businesses, in geographic communities, as the crisis continues to worsen, as without any question it will worsen over the next 2, 5, 10 years. We think that is certain. What we think needs to happen is that people see that it's certain soon enough so that they can add to it as soon as possible, so that it can be as wide and as wise as possible. These are the kind of open questions, right? Is the coming upsurge in consciousness and life-changing behaviors, is it going to be wise enough? Is it going to be wide enough? Is it going to be deep enough? Is it going to be civil enough?